Thank you. Yeah, welcome to everybody. I can't see you all, but hopefully later on. Welcome to the conversations on decoloniality and fashion. This is the first conversation for this year, 2023. What are the conversations on decoloniality and fashion? Well, it is a series of conversations organized by the RCDF, the Research Collective for Decoloniality and Fashion, and particularly organized by Angela Janssen and Erika de Graaf. And the particularity this year is that we will only have 6 conversations over the year that will roughly happen every 2 months. Mind the dates, though. It's not always going to be the same day and not always going to be the same time. The particularity is as well that each conversation is going to be hosted by a different person. So today's host is me, Daniala Goeller, and I'm going to introduce myself later on. The conversations on decoloniality and fashion are an experimental space beyond institutions and geographical and disciplinary boundaries. It is a space to experiment with decolonial and decentral knowledge creation and sharing regarding fashion. And to say it in Rolando Vazquez's words, in conversation, engagement becomes knowledge transformation from a position of consumption to a position of taking responsibility, from a position of indifference to a position of engagement in difference with others, from a place of compassion where we can allow ourselves to be touched and transformed by the other. And in this sense, it is also important that we are mindful of each other's journeys, each other's histories, each other's positionalities, and keep in mind that we are not all coming from the same place and we are not all standing in the same place. Each conversation comprises 90 minutes. 30 minutes is a conversation between the convener or the conveners and the guest or the guests to introduce the topic. Then we usually have a 30-minute breakout session with smaller groups where people can have a more intimate exchange on the topic before we then get back into one space altogether for the final 30 minutes of general discussions, where we would also then share what has been discussed in the smaller groups. For general information, also the first 30 minutes are recorded and made available on the RCDF's website and YouTube channel, together with the selected materials. And it allows us to then create a dynamic and unique open access archive on decoloniality and fashion. It is important, though, to note that these are conversations and not lectures. So they live from the people who participate and make their voices to be heard in this space. And it's not a one-way sense of communication. The conversations are free, but of course the organization takes time, people, resources, and relies therefore on your participation, not only with words, but also with support. So if you can, and if you think this is valuable topic or valuable series of conversations, then you are also invited to donate to keep the conversations going. So today I will host your the conversation. My name is Daniala Goeller. I'm born in Germany and I'm speaking to you right now from Stuttgart in Germany, which is my birthplace. I have lived for a long time in France, in Paris, and for not such a long time, but still quite a long time in Johannesburg in South Africa, where I have worked as well, done research. I'm an art historian and a cultural manager, and I am currently lecturer of cultural history and theory in fashion and design at the AMD, the Academe Mode und Design in Düsseldorf. And I am very pleased to welcome my colleague, Dr. Heeten Bhagat from Cape Town for today's conversation. I'm very honored, Heeten, that you accepted my invitation. Heeten is an academic and a creative consultant and a fashion thinker. And I would actually say we have to write thinker here with a capital T. He really is a strong mind and a project innovator. And innovator should also be underlined here. I have to say, Heeten and I first met, actually never in person. I hope we'll have the occasion to meet in person soon, but our paths crossed about 3 years ago. And there was an online course hosted by the African Fashion Research Institute that was entitled African Fashion ? And I remember Heeten for a very rare, very precious quality that he was actually able to ask questions. But I'm not saying just asking questions, I mean asking questions, meaningful questions, these kind of questions that engage you deeper and deeper into a topic and that bring you to really think and to really engage and to develop ideas that you never thought you had before. So it's this kind of constructive question asking that was something that really impressed me when we met, and especially, of course, in this setting. And this is a bit also what this conversation today is about. We want to actually ask ourselves and ask you questions about what impacts fashion has or how fashion impacts us. Because we think that fashion is so much more than just clothes, and that fashion is actually becoming a more and more valuable tool in the academic field, a tool to actually reflect on what current developments are, what our ongoing debates are on climate change, on also totally different areas that are all linked to fashion, but usually not considered to be part of fashion, as much as fashion is usually not considered in these disciplines to be part of the game. So that's what we want to address today. So we rather want to engage in this in a playful way as well, in an experimental way. And we want to basically ask these three, or set up these three provocations, as in fashion impact, where we consider fashion to be the noun and impact to be the verb. That's what the little N's and V's mean in brackets behind the terms. We want to talk about fashioning impact, where the impact now would be the noun, and the impacts of fashion. So it's playing with these terms around that question of the importance of fashion, or what fashion can be more than just the clothes in this context. And I wanted to actually start by now. Heeten has been asking me so many questions, so I'm going to start this conversation by actually asking him a question. And I would like to start with a very old and famous quote, and it's from Honoré de Balzac. And he said, a person who just sees fashion in fashion is an idiot. Mm. And I want to ask Heaton, what do you see in fashion?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for that very generous introduction. Yeah, it's kind of, it's very humbling. So thank you very much for that. And hello to everyone, and thank you to the RCDF for inviting me into this conversation. As I explained to them earlier, I have a green mouth. I don't know why, but it's what my Zoom is doing for me, so I hope it's not too distracting. And hello to everybody who's joined us. So thank you very much for your time. It's an interesting question for me, partly because I may not answer it directly, but more kind of, I guess, kind of around it. I've recently started to imagine myself as an idiot in the academy, as a kind of productive being. Drawing a little bit from the conversations and the kind of debates around decoloniality, and now kind of stretching into kind of transdisciplinarity, and institutions really kind of struggling with trying to find ways to evidence work beyond kind of taking the stand of decolonization. Especially in the kind of global south right now, I think the term itself is quite productive. But at the same time, it's also very kind of confusing because institutions are so fixed in their kind of practices that kind of actually considering what is the work and what are the moves required to decolonize is pretty terrifying. For an institution. And so in that sense, I've come to understand the fact that posing as a site of absurdity could be quite an interesting proposition for universities and institutions. So the word idiot has become very productive for me. And I draw on a kind of historical understanding of idiocy, less as a kind of mental health condition and more as a space to think, to be allowed to think differently, to be allowed to do differently, as a space to be kind of productively outrageous.